last session before morning tea is a panel discussing funding technology for sustainable impact for the sector. Advancing technology can drive better impact delivery for nonprofits, but funding capability and infrastructure can be a challenge. Today we invite our special guests to the stage who come from some of Australia's most impactful philanthropic bodies to discuss funding impact, building organization capability, and the role of technology in delivering outcomes. We have Peter Walton, CEO, Lord Mayor's Charitable Foundation, Liz Yeo, Chief Alliances Officer, Paul Ramsey Foundation, Dr. Alberto Ferlin, Senior Program Manager, the Ian Potter Foundation, and hosted by David Crosby, CEO, Community Council for Australia. Unfortunately, no fun facts for this panel right now. Come on up while I announce who is sponsoring this. So this panel is brought to you by our conference partner, Strategic Grants, who are free for a chat at the exhibition stands and tell us they are very excited to host their sold-out workshop session tomorrow on the role of technology in measuring and reporting impact, securing grants, and building relationships. Thank you, Strategic Grants, and take it away, David.
Thank you, and it is amazing to be here. And like everyone else, I want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we're meeting, the Wurundjeri people. I have to say, CCA published a report a couple of weeks ago called The Australia We Want. And in that, I was looking at all the data around incarceration in Australia. And I think an Indigenous young person in Western Australia is 50 times more likely to be incarcerated than a non-Indigenous person. So we have a lot of work to do in this country, and I know there's people in the room doing that work, so at least the election result has hopefully helped that a tiny bit. I'm delighted to be here, not only because it's a great gathering of people from the sector, but also because this is a great session. And I think it's incredibly important to the whole sector, this actual idea of philanthropy and IT. And the reason it's so important is because most of us live in a kind of starvation cycle in our sector. So if you look at the ACNC data from 2022, total income of all charities went up by about 8%. Salaries alone, staffing costs went up by 11%. There's a real squeeze on in most not-for-profits. And the very thing that makes us strong, which is our focus on purpose, also makes us weak in this area. Because if I've got to choose between providing that extra frontline service, that extra housing place, that extra meal, that extra whatever, and putting money into IT, what will I choose? Because we're so purpose-driven, IT and investment in technology is often an add-on. Our strength, our focus on purpose, becomes a weakness. And you know, you can make the argument about efficiency and effectiveness, and we should be doing the upfront to get the benefit in the longer term. But most of us work in the real world, in our own charities, trying to make a difference, and that difference is what drives us. So I think it's very difficult to find the capacity to do the kinds of fantastic things that can be done with IT. I'm also pleased to be here because David and the team at Info Exchange, in their wisdom, have made me a judge for the NFP Technology Awards, something I've now done for 5 years. I think David's putting in to get some kind of medal for that task. But in that role, one of the things that is incredibly striking to me is that almost every finalist, and I'm pleased to say most of the work's done, and I only have to look at around 5 entries in each category, almost every submission that makes it to being a finalist has had ring-fenced funding for that project. That is, it's often, more often than not, been funded through philanthropy. It's money that's come from outside the organisation or outside their core purpose and core operations. And that's why I think this is such an important panel, and I hope an important discussion that we'll be able to have today. Because not only do we need to think about why governments don't fund us or why we're not getting pay what it takes, which obviously we should get pay what it takes, and we've been trying to get that for decades, and we will continue to try and get it, and everyone should be supporting that. But we also have a responsibility in our own organisations to think about how our resources are being used and think about longer term benefits to our communities, the communities we serve, through this kind of investment. So, having said that very kind of brief intro, I've suggested that I'm going to ask each of the panellists to introduce themselves, tell us about their role, but also tell us what it is that makes them think it's worthwhile to invest in a particular proposal for some kind of IT transformation in a charity or not-for-profit. What is it that gets IT proposals over the line in their eyes? And I'll start with you, Liz.
Thanks, David, and great to see everyone. And I also want to extend my respects to traditional custodians here in Naarm, Melbourne. Fantastic to be here amongst friends and colleagues across the sector. So yes, as David said, my name's Liz. I'm the Chief Alliances Officer at the Paul Ramsay Foundation. I'm not sure about my credentials to be on this panel, other than that we invest in technology, because I am originally a social worker. I have overseen at least 2 failed CRM implementations. So, you know, my credentials may be questioned rightly
We
by
learn
some.
from failure, Liz.
Luckily, I have former colleagues and present colleagues in the room who know much better than I in this, who know much more than I in this space. But in terms of my role and the sorts of things that we consider in terms of investments in technology, PRF as a foundation is very focused on how do we shift the conditions that exacerbate and contribute to cycles, intergenerational cycles of disadvantage. We are very interested in how we can shift those conditions. And so we're in the business of long-term systems change. And there's a couple of elements of that that are particularly relevant to this topic. And one has already been mentioned, I'm very pleased, a couple of times this morning, which is pay what it takes. So as a funder, we are absolutely committed to whatever grants we're making to funding the cost of overheads of those grants. And that, of course, includes technology. So we will sometimes ask, because I know, especially with smaller not-for-profits, and I come more recently from that background as well, both small and large not-for-profits, that people are very shy to ask for what they actually need because they're so used to that starvation cycle that they don't think they can ask for the right percentage of overheads. And I'm sure many people would be very familiar here that the pay what it takes research showed that the true cost of overheads is in the league of 33% for most not-for-profits. And again, I've certainly experienced that managing a not-for-profit. You're constantly cobbling money from different places to try and meet the cost of those overheads. So that's one element that is really important to us. When it comes to the people and places that we exist for, where we do want to see that shift in conditions, we also want to make sure that we are focused on what we call democratising data. So we want to find ways to be able to influence data being more accessible to those people and places, those community organisations that need it to be able to make good decisions, to understand what's happening in their community, to bring that data alongside their lived experience of what's going on in their community. So we are very committed to the things that we can fund that will help people and places and the community sector have greater access. So yeah, that's probably, there's a lot more I can say about that, but I'm going to leave it at that so the other panellists can also have their chance to.
Thanks, Liz.
Yeah.
Peter?
Well, thank you for talking about democratisation of technology. I can cross that one off. I can probably cross pay what it takes off. Let me start with a fun fact. I have spent a year in the philanthropic space as CEO of Lord Mayor's Charitable Foundation, which we're now describing as a 101-year-old startup. 30 years prior to that, I was sitting on the other side of the table thinking, how do you get fair funding solutions to really deliver impact? How do you really make sure that an organisation is able to invest in the tools of the trade and the technology to really make a difference? And so I, sitting on this side of the table now, we are rethinking, how can we ensure that our role in philanthropy is to be part of a solution, not part of something which inadvertently contributes to, you mentioned the starvation cycle. I heard an expression once, not-for-profits operate in the not-for-profit Hunger Games, where, funding, whether it's from philanthropic trusts and foundations or other sources such as government, is often a competition of cheapness as opposed to effectiveness, in terms of what does it really cost to deliver impact. So we are really leaning into that space as an organisation that wants to play a role as a community foundation for Greater Melbourne and Victoria in, how can we contribute in a way which adds value to a change in our economy that puts people and planet first, that puts social justice and equity first, but also recognises that we are not the centre of this, we're actually a bit part player, and that the organisations that are often best placed are community organisations. So how do we make sure that we're taking steps not only to better support them with fair funding solutions, and that could be trust-based philanthropy, it could be increasing the overheads for particular grants, but also what does it mean to have the humility to change ourselves when we recognise that, often, and I'm sure Liz experiences this too, many organisations will apply to us and only a certain percentage will be successful in a grant. They use our forms. They then, if they're not successful, go to Paul Ramsay Foundation or Ian Potter Foundation, use their forms. And inadvertently, we are contributing to sort of making it harder to get the funds that are needed. I'll get off my soapbox with one other thing to say about pay what it takes. I think it's fantastic that we're seeing more philanthropic organisations recognise that if you're really serious on impact, pay what it takes to deliver impact and effectiveness. Don't have a competition of cheapness. But also, let's be honest here, trusts and foundations in this country play a relatively small role in terms of the overall costs of the community sector. And the biggest culprit of not paying what it takes at the moment is government. So, I think we also have a role within philanthropy to how do we add our collective voice to making sure that when it comes to fair funding solutions, it's across society, not just in pockets, which are only a part of dealing with the issue. Thank you.
Very good point, Peter. Alberto.
Thanks, David. I continue on the fan facts, of course. And when I told my colleagues that I was speaking at a technology conference, they almost laughed at me. Clearly, the Luddite of the Ian Potter Foundation, and clearly, exemplified by the lack of technology on me at that moment. Look, to the point made by, thank you for the point made before, I agree with all of that. To the questions, the core questions about what resonates when we consider grants that imply technology from our applicants, it's we look at a couple of things for all our programs, and it's whether or not it achieves the social missions of the organization, whether or not it makes sense, whether or not there's capacity and what we can add with that capacity, and whether or not that program or project resonates with what they do and with other collaborators, essentially. So if technology is the best solution for the particular thing they want to achieve, then we fund technology. In some way, we're democratizing technology by considering it at the same level or any other services they deliver. When people say, which overhead should I put in your budget? And I always ask back, well, I don't know. Do you want to pay the rent or do you want to turn the lights on? Isn't it the same? Isn't technology the same that, salaries to your people? Isn't salaries the same as the biscuits in the kitchen? It's all one, and it all needs to be treated by one from our side to the other side. We supported Justice Connect with the Dear Landlord model, and that helps people to generate letters for landlord when they need to sort of ask for reduction of rent or other matters. And that made perfect sense because that's core business of what Justice Connect can do, and also makes a bit of sense because unfortunately there's a large number of people that require to go to their landlords because they're in a fairly challenging situation. So to us, if it makes sense to the organization, it makes sense to us. And then of course we need to fit that within our priorities, guidelines, and distribution capacity. The willingness to fund equally and to the level needed, unfortunately, is not matched by the level of funding we have. Unfortunately, and that's one of the problems of philanthropy. We never have enough money to do everything we should be doing.
I think we all experience that problem, Alberto. My next question, and we're going to ask 2 more questions, and then we're going to encourage you to be asking us questions. My next question is, what do you see as the biggest emerging challenge as a philanthropist looking at funding technology within our sector?
I think AI's come up a lot, and we definitely would be in the school of thought that says, yes, it has incredible potential, and it also has serious risks as well. So that's a space that we're looking at and we are funding a number of things that are in that sort of space of testing and trying. So there's been, I think, a couple of things mentioned earlier today around what functions AI might be able to provide by way of efficiency, back office, that sort of stuff. So a role that philanthropy can definitely play is in doing some of that testing and learning. So, we would talk about at PRF that we invest, but we also build, we build evidence and we influence, and we've touched on that too. So, so I think in terms of challenges, that would be a big one. But I think there are long-standing challenges in our sector that have never gone away around, just how many organisations, especially small not-for-profits, have someone who's actually got expertise in technology. I mean, if you're lucky, I had someone in my last small organisation, who happens to be at this conference, who did have experience in technology, but she was also managing HR, finance, and a building that was crumbling, leaking, infested with bird lice and asbestos. So, you have a lot of things on your plate when you're trying to do those multiple things. I don't think that's changed too much over many years in the sector, that people just don't have that kind of capacity and capability. And so hence the failed attempts, like I touched on earlier, where you're asking people to do things that are either beyond their capacity or beyond their capability. So they remain big challenges, I think. But there are great opportunities, and we would definitely advocate for looking at how philanthropy can back some of those innovative opportunities with AI.
Pina?
I think one of the biggest risks is around the pace of change and keeping up. Already in this conference, we've heard about all the new acronyms, going from CEO to LEO to and there's a quote that I've heard and used many times, which is, the world is getting better and better, worse and worse, faster and faster. And I'm thinking, depending on where you are, what's your experience? And I think for the not-for-profit sector, and having spent most of my career in that sector, the resource constraints is a massive challenge. Clearly, I think in this country, most not-for-profits actually have unrestricted reserves of a level which is probably less than 2 months. So the ability to have resilience to withstand shocks, let alone have resources to invest, is just a fundamental challenge. And I think the consequence of that is around what Doug mentioned before, that whilst there's huge potential, whether it's AI, use of technology for productivity or whatever, there's also a real risk of growing inequality and a divide. And it's actually in this building, probably 12 years ago, I was part of a federal government panel sort of trying to promote what was then called telework. Who would have thought that we'd actually have people working from home? And my involvement was, well, how do we make sure that technology can be inclusive for people with carer responsibilities or mobility issues? But interestingly, we had a meeting, this committee, upstairs on the 26th floor, I think it was here, in what was then called the Telepresence Centre. And it was this amazing facility where you sat on a half a table looking at a mirror image through screens of the exact same room in another Telstra office. And it felt to me at the time, well, this is the future. This is the closest you'll get to feeling as if you're having a face-to-face meeting online. This could be revolutionary. And, then we had a pandemic. But importantly, I said at the time, well, how much does something like this cost? He said, well, this was pretty cheap. This was $24 million, and that was like 10 or 12 years ago. So, I think there's that real risk that those that can capitalize on technology will race ahead. And how do we actually democratize it and make it accessible for all through fair funding?
Thanks, Peter. Alberto?
I'm thinking about a couple of issues here, and I agree with all of that. I'm thinking about the basic infrastructure of most not-for-profit, which is woefully lacking capacity, and how philanthropy can support that, because there's so many out there that we just can't go and help everyone. We need to find a way to pool funding to help a system that supports not-for-profit basic and then growing needs. And the other thing is supporting not-for-profit to sift through the offerings, because is AI going to help us to write more emails that nobody wants to read, or is AI truly helping us, supporting the ultimate beneficiaries of the social mission of the enterprise? So of course, the second, but where's the boundary? And I think that's a lot of sifting through stuff that we think we need, but we actually probably don't.
I'm going to ask one more quick question, and this arises from I've seen sort of beta testing of an AI-driven government department. You go in, you choose the skin of the person you're going to talk to, so that you have an avatar of choice. There's a camera on you. You talk to that avatar about what your issue is. I'm unhappy with my housing provision. The avatar asks you questions and uses all the frequently asked questions, all your file, because it's got it all, to answer to you. And if you start to get angry, it talks in a softer way, or it's based on the hello baby kind of approach. And I've been told that although these beta versions exist and have been tested, people feel they can't roll them out because of ethical considerations. So this would be a 24-hour readily available service that the testing suggests a whole range of people with disability, people with various kinds of issues, find better than talking to a human. But we choose not to do it at this stage because of the kind of implications, unions, robo-debt, all that kind of stuff. Do you see ethical considerations as a key factor when you're looking at proposals? And to what degree is it about, Alberto talked about it needs to be about the core mission of the organisation, and you talked about it being about changing the preconditions so that you're actually addressing some issue with impact rather than just short term. Is there an ethical dimension to your consideration about IT proposals? I might start with you, Alberto. We'll go the other way.
Well, I guess it's, again, down to social missions and relationship. To me, it's down to how an organization treats and works for and with their beneficiaries, right? So, if the avatar is to exclude, it's just easier to exclude, legal claim against the organization. Obviously, it's not a positive avatar. If the avatar is to facilitate the access to services for people with disabilities or people that are in very rural and remote areas, that's probably not a bad idea. To the implementation of it, it's also a matter of education. I mean, if anybody of you deals with Gen Z, Gen A kids like I am, you know already they don't want to talk to anybody. They want to email and deal with the computers, you know, the face. So it's already coming. It's a matter of educate the public that this is done with them, not for them and to them. So I mean I think the ethical considerations are overarching, and one would hope that there was a conversation about it before those things are rolled out, rather than just either an implementation a la RoboDet or a reluctance that goes nowhere, you know, because of the other side of the ethical domain.
The short answer, yes, we consider ethics and the concept of do no harm. But I think, you know, at this event last year, we had a former colleague of mine, Judy Slatcher, who was at the time the chair of the Responsible AI Task Force, and she sort of admitted that the regulations and the protections around advances in technology, especially AI, will always be behind the innovation. So I think we've got a judgment here to make, because I think one of the roles of philanthropy is to be able to support and take risk around testing new things which can have good social outcomes. But there's always, but we are sort of always in a bit of a catch-up mode in that space. So I think there's an element of applying a common sense, do no harm assessment to anything in this area.
And I would ditto, and we would say we would always do the test of to what extent have people with lived experience of this issue or are going to be the end users of this particular technology. How have they been engaged in this?
So if and this is my last question, and we've got some good questions coming. So if in this case the testing showed that it was much better experience for the people who were using, you know, they could choose their own avatar, was better informed than any human, was more responsive to their mood and their... but the implications for the organisation would be significant loss of staff, you know, there'd be a kind of social licence question. So if you were really driven entirely by people's experience, you would introduce this, wouldn't you?
Our ultimate test would always be, is this going to result in better outcomes for the people and places that we're focused on? So, yeah, there could be other unintended consequences. But I think as people have touched on before, most community organisations are way overstretched already on what they're doing, how many, you know, all the issues they're trying to solve. So I think I'm sure there's probably still plenty of jobs out there. I think it's about which jobs can be done in other ways and which jobs still need a human-to-human interaction.
Peter?
It feels like a trick question, because I think there's winners and losers in any scenario. Building on what Liz has said, you know, I think for a philanthropic organisation, whose voice really informs good decision making, and the voice of lived experience, community voice, First Nations voice, I think has got to come into this much more. So it's not philanthropic organisations thinking they always know best, because invariably we don't. I think the other thing to say is, I mean, as a community foundation, we're trying to operate at multiple levels, both what do we do for what we see as immediate needs in our community now, but not at the expense of just treating symptoms, and, you know, what are the policy reforms, what are the broader changes in the ecosystem that will make, in our case, Greater Melbourne and its region, a fairer, more just, more equitable place for all. So the unintended consequences, we're trying to strike a balance between operating at all those levels. And, you know, even internally, for example, we are looking at AI, not to replace humans, because we're a relationship-driven organisation, but how do we use AI to ensure we don't have unconscious bias from grant seekers because one person holds a lot of the information in the relationship. So I think there's always going to be sort of strengths and weaknesses, and we're going to, like everyone else, we're just going to navigate that carefully.
Beneficiaries and organizations staff are part of the same community as are everyone else. So I think a solution needs to benefit all stakeholders, and I think a solution needs to be found within the stakeholders. Lived experience, of course, but also organizations. It's probably implementation of cost savings and rationalizations ways that the not-for-profit could definitely do. But with a broader picture, there's also the 4 days week, and and the work less, work everyone. And it's like if we look at the long track, I doubt that this country will work full time with the same salary as it is now in 20 years' time. We just don't have enough jobs for the people, despite the low productivity. If technology progresses this way, so we need to rethink about our way of living.
Great. I'm going to go to some of the questions, and I want to build on that kind of discussion we're already having. When you're considering the potential benefits of a proposal, do you draw on technical expertise to do that? And if so, how do you do that? Whoever.
Well, yes, we do. But as I said, I've been in the role a year. We've launched a new strategy a couple of months ago. We're rethinking all of that at the moment because, yes, we need subject matter sort of specialists, if you like, to guide us. But we also want to make sure that we don't fall into the trap of thinking we have all of the answers and it's just seeking a technical solution to a complex social issue. So community voice, lived experience is going to play a much bigger role, as is also, and I think this is, I guess, just sharing what's going on within my brain about our organisation. When we deal with complex social issues, they're not siloed. They reflect the complexities of society. So if we're looking at housing affordability and homelessness, we can't detach that thinking from, well, what are the implications of domestic violence on why over 65-year-old women are finding themselves on the streets. So, we're trying to look at how do we have the right level of conversation, but also landing on something which is very much community-led.
Yeah, it's very much part of the due diligence process. So, there are other types of funding that we might provide that require very different technical expertise. I'm not just talking about technology, it might be in the, environmental space or something in a remote community. Like, we don't have expertise like that. So, so I think for us, it's all part of due diligence. What external expertise or input do we need? And the other thing that we're often looking at in our granting is the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. So we're less inclined to look at like individual organisations and what's the requirement for that organisation and that grant, but what's the collective piece here that we can do in a group of grants rather than a one-off.
Similar answer to that, of course, we look at the expertise, external or internal, in terms of the areas funded. So for medical research for us, we have a panel of medical research experts within the board and outside that we help ourselves with, and other aspects as well. But to the point made by Liz, the next question is not just a series of organizations, but the landscape and what that project is going to help change at policy level as well. So no project can be seen in itself as a standalone, but it's about what it does and what it's going to do for the future. That's a long plan.
So can I raise the kind of perennial issue that's been raised about philanthropy, which is really it seems often that you need to have something innovative or new or different or ring-fenced from your normal operation that you can put in to philanthropy to get funding. And the degree to which that is, I think sometimes that's combined with a sense of ownership, identification of how the money's being used because it's a ring-fenced program. To what degree are those considerations that has to be innovative, has to be ring-fenced away from the main organisation's work so you can see the benefit that your particular contribution is made, to what degree are they major factors for you in making decisions about funding?
I'm surprised you didn't add the one that I used to always say when I was on the other side, which was it's got to be innovative, sustainable, you can't pay any staff to do it, and you've got to do it in 6 months. Show us what the results are. And I also say with every grant application, don't expect anything to be on time, because I've not known anything to be on time. So, this is another thing, is like you've got to ask all those questions. Is this time realistic? Is the overhead that you factored in here realistic? But if someone else might want to take the innovative question.
I find that very interesting and very resonant. So I get questions. The applicants go like, so can we actually pay salaries with this fund? And I go like, who's supposed to do the project? Who doesn't pay salary? I mean, I know who doesn't pay salary, but who doesn't pay salary? So look, philanthropy will possibly always have an interest in the single-standing project. But philanthropy has also in the last 5 years come a long way in looking at organization as a whole. We have a stream of funding called capacity building, where we fund the organizations, and usually is a previous grantee because we worked well with them, and we fund core business. You tell us what you need, you make a plan, you tell us what you want to achieve and how it will make sense. We give you the money, you do the stuff you want with it, within the parameters that we have agreed upon, driven by the organizations. So we have this sort of stream where we recognize that, this is what the community asks, and that's what we should be giving it to them. So to some extent, we also have the single project, not necessarily ring fence, but a project that might be innovative because it is a pilot project, and it can fail. So it is called a project. But we also have here's the money, go ahead, and let's chat often about how you're going, not like come back in 5 years and see what happened.
I would say it's not a one-size-fits-all. We've funded some amazing innovations and use of technology to solve thorny issues. I think one was mentioned earlier, Justice Connect last year got an award. So that's fantastic. But if our focus is ultimately on impact, we've also got to fund the things that lead to impact and the tried and tested methods as well. And having sat on the other side of the table, lamenting the fact that every $5-10 million grant that I won from government would cost me 10% more than that to deliver. There's a problem. No kidding, Sherlock. There's a problem. So I think it's incumbent on us to recognise and have humility that impact is vicarious. It's not ours. It's our community partners. But also that we've got to be open to different ways of funding. And Mackenzie Scott, the philanthropist in the States, she's being sort of crucified in social media around the concept of trust-based philanthropy. But I feel pretty convinced that history will prove her right. That if you just trust organisations that know their work better than we ever will, and actually have a commitment to addressing the other issue, which is this triumph of short-termism over longer-term commitments. There aren't quick fixes, and if we keep funding activity and output as opposed to building a relationship that leads to social change, positive social change, then we will be on a hamster wheel dealing with the same issues over and over again. So we have to change ourselves.
Can I add one thing on this question as well? We are increasingly looking at funding things where we are in some sort of dialogue, at least with government, about it, so that it's not just some fantasy, which is often what it is. There's a fantasy sometimes in philanthropy that we'll fund something and it will be this great innovation and then someone will magically adopt it. So I think starting from the early days of let's talk to government, or the language that's often used, as we know in philanthropy, is risk capital. How can we provide some risk capital for government on this? How can we back something in for them that they can't fund? A collaboration piece like the Data Catalyst Network is an example of great collaboration through Info Exchange that we fund. So how can we fund the things government's not often going to give money for that sort of stuff? And so it's not about everything's got to be innovative, but it's what's the piece that's unique that we can do that government can't easily do. They can't easily do it now, but if we can prove something, if we can build evidence around something, if we can influence them around something, because we are in that unique position, and I've never been in that position, where you can walk into a conversation with someone from government and say, I'm not here to ask you for money. And I know that that's how most of the sector has to operate, constantly looking for and asking for money. So we can play a role there. That's not about asking for money, but it's about asking for influence, and it's about the opportunity to test things and prove things. Yeah.
Well, can I come to the issue that you raised, really, which is sustainability? I mean, we've been talking a lot, I'm not sure that Chris is in the room from Justice Connect, about how brilliant some of their innovations have been in the use of AI. And as a judge, I've awarded them at least 2 prizes for outstanding work. And yet, in terms of getting ongoing core funding to support that work, it's not necessarily going that well. So there is this thing that you're able to get the initial funding to do the innovative new, we've now set this up, but trying to get the ongoing funding, which you don't generally provide, leaves people sort of, the sector's littered with project epitaphs, Here lies the We Did Good program. It existed for a time. There were some really good people. Kaz did some great work. David did some great work. And now the funding's gone and they're doing other things. Our sector is brilliant at creating lighthouse programs that we just turn the lights off when they're finished. How do you address this issue of sustainability from a philanthropic perspective?
I think there's what can we do, what's within our realm of control, and I think it's around recognising, and I agree with Liz, funding a pilot on the basis that evidence alone is going to be compelling enough for government to step in, and then it isn't, and then we act surprised. So I think it's got to be tackled at 2 levels. One is, what is our longer commitment beyond the introduction, or how can we collaborate with others early on to sort of think about how something can be sustained. But also, in the last panel, I think it was Cass that raised the issue of how do you also treat some of this systemically? We have the issue that we have because we're operating in a society that is actually quite unjust and unfair, and and government doesn't have the funds that it would like to have to do everything that we would want it to do. That's the thorny problem that needs to often be solved. Do we need tax reform so that they can do that? Because I think there is a real risk for philanthropy that we become seen as a band-aid solution for underfunded government systems. And that's not our role either.
Yep. Can I really echo that one? And I want to build on what Cass said earlier, because not only we need to generate more revenue to back these things properly, to back social change. But this is so key, what government's prepared to do in this space. And the thing is, they've done it when there's been a crisis. So they did it in COVID with JobSeeker and also with funding for community organisations for technology. Yeah. And I was in a small organisation at the time. We got the biggest grant we'd ever gotten, $253,000. It set up the organisation with all the great technological infrastructure that it had never had. And I don't know how those systems and processes are working now. I hope they still are. But it was an injection because of a crisis. So it's like, how do we get beyond these injections that we get through a crisis that prove, just the same as with JobSeeker, we had clients at that time who could go and buy their own groceries instead of lining up for a food bank package, So how do we do that in a long-term sustained way? I think that is our influence challenge, to get beyond just in a crisis and just a short-term chunk of funding.
I agree with all of that, but I'm going to be a little more crude than that, and I'm going to say that we need to coalesce, and we need to pay a lobbyist to go to Canberra and convince the government, tell the government, not convince because they know it, that it's cheaper, it works better, and it's the right thing to do.
Well, some of us spend most of our day doing that, Alberto.
Yes, but perhaps not seen as necessarily to be listened to, like other lobbyists from other sectors. So,
yeah, and
how do you shift that dial? Because, if I'm thinking about the industry, they're there every day of the week.
I'm conscious we've got 20 seconds. Can I really quickly say, we've just had an election, right? And in all the pre-election campaign meetings and town halls, when the politicians stood up in front of a crowd and asked them what their questions were, there would have been charities in that room, and there would have been small business and other people in the room. The small business people will stand up and say, we need more support for cyber security, for data privacy, for data use, because it's critical to our business. We need to be able to write off more and have lower tax rates. And politicians tell me no matter where they go, wherever there's a public meeting, there will be a small business person making those kinds of claims. We need this, we need that. When the charity stands up, let's use Justice Connect, because we've been talking about Justice Connect, they will talk about the need for legal services. They will talk about their purpose. They'll talk about the need for inequity to be addressed. They'll talk about the environment. They'll talk about whatever their purpose is. We need to learn to be more selfish. I don't think, I was saying to Doug as he left, I don't think I used the term muscular. I used the term selfish. Until we become selfish in the same way that others do around our capacity won't change. And so we need to recognise that focusing on our purpose is fundamental and important, but it's costing us, and we need to add in a level of selfishness. So I was going to give you a last comment, but we've run out of time. Anything burning that you want to say that you didn't get to say?
Just thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Back to you. Thank you.